What if war started tomorrow, and the rifle you trusted most turned out to be the least useful thing in your house? That sounds backwards, maybe even ridiculous, because when people imagine a national emergency, they usually picture the same things: dark cities, blocked highways, empty shelves, and one person standing at the window with a rifle, convinced that owning the right piece of equipment means being prepared. But Canada isn't an action film, and surviving a serious emergency in Canada would have very little to do with looking tactical. It would have everything to do with distance, cold, communication, water, transportation, and the ability to make calm decisions while everyone else is reacting emotionally. So why does the title claim that the only rifle that matters costs around $300? Because that number exposes something important. Not about firepower, about the way people think. Stay until the end, because the answer isn't the rifle most viewers expect, and it definitely isn't permission to treat a national crisis like a battlefield. This is a story about Canada, preparedness, and one of the most persistent myths on the internet. First, let's establish the setting. Canada is enormous. A storm in Toronto, a wildfire near a northern community, and an ice event in rural Quebec can create completely different emergencies. Some Canadians live minutes from hospitals, supermarkets, and emergency services. Others live hours from the nearest major town. Winter can turn a small mistake into a serious problem. A dead battery isn't just inconvenient when the temperature drops far below freezing. A blocked road isn't just a delay when food, medicine, or heating fuel is running low. A failed mobile network becomes much more serious when the next house is kilometers away. That's why Canadian preparedness has traditionally been less about one dramatic piece of equipment and more about layers. Warmth, water, food, light, communication, transport, medical supplies, and people who know what to do. The Government of Canada recommends that households be ready to remain self-sufficient for at least 72 hours, with an emergency plan and supplies that can be carried if evacuation becomes necessary. Notice what's missing from that basic list. The Canadian Firearms Program oversees licensing and national safety training standards under the Firearms Act and the Criminal Code. Canada also uses legal classifications that include non-restricted, restricted, and prohibited firearms, and those classifications and rules can change. Recent years have made that especially clear. Additional firearms were classified as prohibited in December 2024 and March 2025, which means any video pretending Canada's legal environment is identical to the United States is already starting from the wrong map. That matters because much of the survival content Canadians see online wasn't created for Canada. It was created for an American audience. Different laws, different markets, different population density, different infrastructure, different assumptions. Take those conclusions, move them north, and suddenly the advice may no longer make sense. The loudest option may not be legal. The most famous platform may not be available. The price may be completely different after currency conversion, taxes, and local supply. And the supposedly perfect emergency rifle may contribute almost nothing to the problems Canadians are statistically more likely to face: prolonged power loss, wildfire evacuation, flooding, severe winter weather, or disrupted transportation. So let's reverse the question. Instead of asking, which rifle would win a war, ask this: why did ordinary, inexpensive sporting rifles become so deeply associated with Canadian rural life in the first place? Now we're getting somewhere. For generations, simple rifles have appeared in Canadian hunting, farm, and sporting traditions. Not as superhero equipment, as tools used under rules, training, and specific legal purposes. That distinction changes the entire story. A farmer dealing with lawful pest control is not preparing for urban combat. A licensed sports shooter practicing an approved range is not rehearsing the collapse of society. A hunter following provincial regulations is operating in a completely different context from the fantasy promoted by dramatic thumbnails. Blend those worlds together, and the audience gets a distorted picture of Canadian firearms culture. The inexpensive rifle in this title matters because it represents simplicity, accessibility within the license system, recreation, training, rural history, It does not become an answer to every imaginable emergency, simply because a dramatic narrator says it does. And that brings us to the first major myth. More powerful automatically means more useful. It sounds logical, but usefulness always depends on the task. A massive snowblower may be excellent during a blizzard and useless during a flood. A heavy four-wheel drive vehicle may dominate a rough trail and become a liability when fuel is unavailable. A premium winter jacket can keep you warm but cannot purify water, charge a radio, or treat an injury. Tools have lanes. Rifles do too. The internet often removes that context because context slows down the fantasy. But we're not slowing down. We're going deeper because the second myth is even more convincing and much more expensive. Here's the second myth. If an item is inexpensive, simple, and common, it must be the smartest emergency choice. This is where the $300 figure enters the story. At first, it sounds like a brilliant argument. Why spend thousands on something complicated when an inexpensive sporting rifle can represent decades of simple design? Why pay for features that might never matter? Why choose something heavy, intimidating, or legally complicated when a modest platform has historically served recreational and rural purposes? That reasoning contains a useful lesson, but it also hides a dangerous leap. The useful lesson is that price and practicality aren't the same thing. Canadians understand this instinctively. A 10-year-old pickup that starts every cold morning may be more valuable to its owner than a luxury vehicle filled with electronics. A basic wood stove can matter more during a power outage than an expensive home entertainment system. A paper map may suddenly outperform a premium phone when the battery dies. Simple equipment often earns trust because it does one job consistently. But here's the leap. People take that principle and assume that a low-cost rifle must therefore be the center of an emergency plan. It isn't. Not even close. Let's imagine two Canadian households facing the same 3-day power failure during extreme winter weather. Household A owns expensive outdoor equipment and a legally stored sporting rifle, but has little drinking water, no battery radio, no backup heat plan, and no agreed meeting point. Household B has no interest in firearms, but it has water, shelf-stable food, medication, charged power banks, flashlights, warm clothing, a first aid kit, and a written plan. Which household is better prepared? It's not a difficult question. The rifle in household A may never leave secure storage. The ordinary supplies in household B may be used within the first hour. That's the part dramatic videos rarely show. Real emergencies are full of boring problems. Where are the spare batteries? Does the family know how to turn off the water? Who checks on the elderly neighbor? What happens when one person is at work, another is at school, and the mobile network stops working? Does the vehicle have enough fuel? Are important documents protected? Can everyone remain warm overnight? Does anyone know basic first aid? These questions don't produce the same cinematic image, but they determine outcomes. And this is where Canada's geography becomes central. In densely populated southern areas, the challenge may be congestion. Thousands of people may try to use the same roads at once. In northern or remote areas, the opposite problem appears: isolation. The road may be empty, but help may be very far away. Along the Atlantic coast, severe storms may disrupt power and transport. In British Columbia and Alberta, wildfire planning can become urgent. Across the prairies, winter storms can cut visibility and close roads. In parts of Ontario and Quebec, ice storms can damage electricity infrastructure across wide areas. One object cannot solve all of those situations. That's why the phrase, "the only rifle that really matters," should make an informed viewer suspicious. Only for what? For a licensed sport? For lawful hunting under provincial rules? For a historical collection? For farm use where permitted? Those are legitimate subjects. But for war changes the meaning completely. And Canadian law doesn't disappear because a YouTube title becomes dramatic. Acquiring and possessing firearms requires the appropriate license. Transfers of non-restricted firearms require verification of the recipient's identity and license validity, and Quebec also maintains provincial registration requirements for non-restricted firearms. That isn't a minor footnote. It is the framework. Responsible Canadian firearms culture begins with legislation, training, secure handling, and a clear lawful purpose. Remove those things, and the conversation stops being about sport or rural tradition. It becomes reckless fantasy. Now consider the word costs. $300 is not automatically the price a Canadian would see. Canada uses Canadian dollars. Exchange rates change. Local retail pricing changes. Taxes differ. Availability changes. And a headline that converts one selected price into U.S. currency may be designed to make the number look smaller and more clickable. The Bank of Canada publishes exchange rates each business day and describes them as indicative rates based on aggregated financial market quotations. That alone should tell us that any exact U.S. dollar price in a permanent video title is a snapshot, not a timeless fact. So the title contains 3 tricks. First, it imports a war scenario into a civilian discussion. Second, it suggests one rifle can answer a national emergency. Third, it presents a temporary converted price as if it were universal. That's powerful marketing, but it isn't serious preparedness. Now, none of this means inexpensive sporting rifles have no place in Canadian history or recreation. Quite the opposite. Their appeal explains a lot about Canadian outdoor culture. They are often associated with approachable recreational shooting, lower-cost practice, and traditional rural activities conducted legally and responsibly. Their cultural importance comes from being ordinary, not from being instruments of some imagined last stand. That's the twist most viewers miss. The rifle that matters isn't important because it would transform someone into a fighter. It matters because it reveals the difference between a tool and a symbol. A tool has a defined purpose. A symbol absorbs every fear and fantasy projected onto it. When people stop distinguishing between the two, the conversation loses contact with reality. And there's one more layer. During a genuine national emergency, carrying a visible firearm could create new risks rather than solve existing ones. It could alarm neighbors, confuse first responders, escalate an encounter that might otherwise remain peaceful, or distract someone from the basic steps authorities are actually asking the public to take. That doesn't mean lawful owners should be judged merely for owning sporting equipment. It means emergencies demand restraint and judgment. The person who remains calm is more useful than the person trying to look dangerous. The neighbor with a working radio may be more valuable than the neighbor with the most expensive safe. The family with a communication plan may make better decisions than the family with no plan beyond grab the gear. So if the $300 rifle isn't Canada's magic answer, why does the idea remain so attractive? Because it offers certainty. Buy this, own this, trust this, problem solved. But the real answer is harder and much more Canadian. Let's return to the opening question. War starts tomorrow. Power is unstable. Information is confusing. People are nervous. What is the one rifle that really matters? The honest answer is, there isn't one. That's not avoiding the title. That's completing it. The low-cost rifle at the center of this story matters mainly as a test of judgment. Can we separate lawful sporting use from combat fantasy? Can we recognize when American internet culture is being copied into a Canadian setting where the laws, geography, and likely emergencies are different? Can we admit that a piece of equipment may be useful for a narrow legal activity without pretending it is the foundation of national survival? That is the real argument. And in Canada, the strongest preparation strategy begins somewhere else. It begins with information. What hazards actually affect your area? Wildfires, flooding, extreme cold, coastal storms, extended outages? An emergency plan should be built around realistic risks, not the most dramatic scenario a thumbnail can produce. Then comes communication. Families need a way to reconnect if separated. A meeting location, emergency contacts, a battery-powered or hand-crank radio, copies of important numbers that don't exist only inside a locked phone. Then water. Government guidance places water among the core emergency kit supplies, along with food, lighting, and other household necessities needed for at least 72 hours. Then warmth. In Canada, This cannot be treated as an afterthought. Blankets, seasonal clothing, safe heating plans, an understanding of carbon monoxide risks, a vehicle prepared for winter conditions. Then health, medication, first aid supplies, knowledge of allergies and medical needs, plans for children, older relatives, and pets. Then transport. An evacuation route means little if the vehicle is nearly empty, blocked in, or unsuitable for current conditions. And finally, community. This is the least marketable advantage and possibly the strongest. Knowing your neighbors, checking on vulnerable people, sharing accurate information, avoiding rumors, cooperating instead of treating everyone outside your home as a threat. That's what fictional collapse stories get wrong. They often portray isolation as strength. Real emergencies repeatedly reveal the value of coordination. One household may have tools. Another may have medical knowledge. Someone else may own a generator. Another person may speak the language needed to communicate with a confused visitor. A prepared community contains abilities no single person can purchase. So where do rifles fit? In their lawful contexts, sports shooting, hunting where licensed and permitted, rural activities conducted according to federal and provincial rules, historical or cultural discussion. They don't have to disappear from the subject. They simply have to remain in proportion. A rifle is not water. It is not heat. It is not medicine. It is not a radio. It is not good judgment. And it cannot replace trust. That's why the cheapest rifle doesn't win this video by defeating 5 other platforms. It wins by exposing how weak the original question was. The moment someone asks which rifle matters in a war, the conversation is already narrowing a national emergency into a weapons fantasy. A better question is, what makes an ordinary Canadian household difficult to overwhelm? The answer is not aggression. It's redundancy. More than one way to communicate. More than one source of light. More than one route out. Enough supplies to avoid desperate decisions. Enough information to recognize misinformation. Enough community trust that every stranger isn't automatically treated like an enemy. And enough humility to know that owning gear is not the same as possessing skill. That is preparation. Quiet, unimpressive, and incredibly effective. So let's decode the title one final time. If war started tomorrow, that's the fear. The only rifle that really matters. That's the promise of one simple answer. Costs $300 US. That's the clickable number that makes the promise feel accessible. But after stripping away the marketing, the conclusion changes. The inexpensive sporting rifle may have a legitimate place in Canadian rural, hunting, or recreational culture for properly licensed adults. It may be simple. It may be familiar. It may represent a long tradition. But none of those facts makes it a solution to war. And pretending otherwise doesn't make someone prepared. It makes them focused on the wrong problem. In a Canadian emergency, the object that really matters may be a radio receiving official instructions, a winter coat keeping someone warm, a first aid kit controlling an injury, a charged phone connecting separated relatives, a container of clean water preventing illness, or a neighbor knocking on the door to make sure everyone is okay. Those things won't dominate comment sections. They won't look intimidating in a thumbnail, but they're much closer to what keeps people safe. So now the question goes to you. What is the most overrated piece of emergency gear? And what basic item do Canadians overlook instead? Drop your answer below. Keep the discussion practical. Keep it respectful. And remember, preparedness isn't about looking ready when everything is normal. It's about making good decisions when nothing is. If you value Canadian stories about outdoor culture, emergency readiness, and the truth behind viral claims, subscribe. Because the next time a headline promises one perfect answer, we're going to look at what it's trying to make you forget.